Welcome to the Beauty Seed.
Right on.
Yeah.
Greetings, Randy Masters. I am so pleased that you saw my email, accepted the invitation to come on the show, found the time in, I'm sure, a busy schedule to be here with us on the Beauty Seed. Most filled with gratitude and grace in my heart, and in our pre-game chat, even more excited.
I love it.
Heart-filled to have you here with us.
Well, thank you.
For those in my audience and your audience and everybody who finds this, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found your way towards what you are into now.
Well, I definitely call myself a Renaissance person, because to me, meaning I'm into a lot of different things. And a lot of that for me is integrating different past, future, parallel lives and having enough of that come through the funnel to integrate and connect the dots.
Yeah.
Better than just, or differently than just being a specialist and going down one rabbit hole. Because I found out going down the rabbit hole, if you are aware and you look left and right, and 90-degree angles, you go off into other dimensions, and there's many more parties there. It's not just going down one elevator straight down, deeper, deeper, deeper. No, you look around, and there's a lot going on down there, and so it's snowballed.
Yeah.
So, my mom played piano and was a school teacher, and had some fantastic influences on me in that regard. And I came from was born in Las Vegas. People are born there. It's truly true.
I have some friends who were born there.
Yeah, I can attest to it.
Yeah.
And my uncle built 3 of the famous hotels there. And the Soundz was one of them, the Rat Pack Hotel.
Yeah.
So as a little kid, I was not a crybaby kid. I was fun. And my parents took me with them, and I would go to the floor shows and things like that, and my famous line, maybe as a 3-year-old, watching the chorus girls, and I had my favorite ones. Even then, I had my birthday party there. That was cool. So how did I come in here? Came in kind of a more auspicious way. That's why I'm going into this. Very different than maybe absolutely. Some of the more serious kind of things that one would expect, with degrees after my name and all that. But actually, I came in a fun way, and so I said, "Well, what did they have on besides all that skin?" That was my line. What did I know? I think I knew more than I didn't know enough to get in trouble, but enough that kept it fun enough that kept me out of trouble. That type of thing. And I had timings for things to open up. So when I was in the 4th grade, I had lapidary equipment in my bedroom, and I used to cut stones, gemstones and stuff.
Cool.
And I didn't have any mentor. I just taught myself, got the equipment, got the rocks, cut them, did it. I wasn't doing the jewelry then where I made settings, but I did cut the stones, and I was very much into the gemstone rock world and knowing about it. And my mom turned me on to all these things. That's what I mentioned as a school teacher, that and seashells. And I mean, I had my home education as a mentor. She pointed the way to a lot of things. That was really fun. So, when she divorced my stepfather, when I was like a sophomore in high school, we got an apartment on the beach in Santa Cruz, up on the cliffs. And then I started composing. I didn't compose before that. I studied music since the 4th grade, because when I was born, my right arm was paralyzed in the birth process.
Oh.
Trying to get me out and
yeah.
Did
Back in the days of a lot of forceps. Also.
No kidding. And I was not a cesarean birth, and it was good because, it kept me out of the military, I must say, because I'm not into going out and fighting those, industrial wars for profit and all that stuff, Yeah. So, and I did not, I admired soldiers and did all the stuff that kids do, plain soldiers do, and I thought they were heroes. But I did, of course, at that age, I had no idea what that really meant, at all. So I worked it out of me. I fought the battles in the neighborhood, playing with the neighbor kids.
Yeah.
Dressing up and doing all that kind of thing, right? So I had a bit of normality there. But then the music stuff started expanding. My mom took me to school where she taught and met the band director on the weekend. And the only instrument I could play and hold left-handed was the trumpet. And that turned out to be a leadership instrument. I went way far with that. I mean, I was invited to play with Tito Punte's Latin Jazz All-Stars and tour with him. I sat in as a guest many times. And I wrote music.
Still one of my favorites.
Yeah, my audition, I was more nervous growing up until I got over that. And so I brought my piccolo trumpet and had it with me backstage. Oh, get it out. Okay, play something. Okay, I hadn't warmed up or anything, so I put the mouthpiece in, and I play a Cuban trumpet solo in the style of chocolate. I mean, authentic, and not like a white kid imitating.
Not like a gringo.
No way. And I mean, it was like authentic. And so, come on out. So I played the whole gig and got invited to do different things, and that was fun. And I played with a lot of other people, plus my own Solar Plexus group. We did 4 albums, an international music jazz group of original music. Played with and wrote for Charlie Byrd, the guitarist. I don't know if you know who he is.
I do.
Yeah,
and I love the name Solar Plexus, by the way.
Yeah, it was really fun. Totally fun, and the energy and what it represented. So I had a great time doing that. I got to do a couple of movie scores because that's what I wanted to study in college. I studied both film and music. And so but instead of working overtime, I combined it into an original major so I could control things. I got hip to how the college worked. And in my senior year, I started teaching classes in the university that I went to, and actually regular classes. And then
What were you teaching?
Music.
Music, okay.
Yeah.
Theory or application?
Jazz music, improvisation, popular songwriting. I introduced that into the UC system. They hadn't had that, not just jazz arranging, which I was a specialist in that. And so I was going on that career, and I figured I would just play and I would bop till I dropped, kind of a thing. Never thought. And I played up until like the year 2000. Then I just put my horn away. I thought, I kind of felt like I completed something that I never thought I would even think about completing. That's what was really interesting.
Yeah.
But I was drum major in high school, and being a lead trumpet player and all, you have to, you stick out. You play a solo and you miss the high note. Everybody knows it.
Oh, yeah.
There's a different tension than the second and third, fourth trumpet players. They not even play, but lead, you stick out. So my life, and I was president of the classes and all that stuff, like I was put into leadership positions.
That leads me to a real quick question. Did you, over time, develop use of your other arm?
Well, this is how it worked. My mom didn't know what to do. She wanted to teach me piano starting like maybe second grade, but I couldn't use all the fingers on my right hand, So I would play with my forefinger upside down and the nail on the key, and my left hand is all over the place.
Yeah.
And if you heard me play and didn't watch what I was doing, you wouldn't know what hand did what. And I developed that. They just left me alone, know what to do with me. So I figured it out, and I was supposed to figure it out, like a lot of things, like cutting the stones with no mentor.
Yeah.
Whatever that's part of it. You come in with these codes, you're supposed to already know it. You don't know that you know it, and you just do things, and people say, well, how did you learn that? Well, I don't know. I do it. I just did it. That type of thing, So
I do know.
So then I played in lots of groups and played keyboard as long as I could adapt the music to fit my hands and not have to read something where the right hand had to do more than that one note upside down kind of thing.
So Rachmaninoff was maybe off the table, or
it was on the table for study, but it was off the table for me playing it and doing concerts and playing Rachmaninoff, but studying and knowing Rachmaninoff and other composers thoroughly. I had a knack for pattern recognition and analysis. Yeah. And so I could take things and analyze it and figure it out when there weren't theory books that talked about a lot of the things that I had figured out there. I'm doing the same thing like with the Flower of Life. And once I got into sacred geometry, I started studying it. It became interesting. I don't know why, through the pyramids and all of that kind of stuff as sort of hobby studies in the background, and nothing I had to show up in public and be accountable for. I could just go at my own pace. And then things kept happening. People would invite me to talk and speak and do all these things. And then I met with Drunvalo Melchizedek, in the late 80s. And he said, well, you're the guy to put the music on the Flower of Life. And that was true. I went after years.
I've studied quite a lot of his work.
Yeah, it's very interesting.
It is.
And about Thoth, which I have whole different attitudes about now. I'm awake,
Sure.
that I wasn't then. It fascinated me. I hadn't heard about these in the Emerald Tablets, and I got that, these things came along, and before I knew what it was, I was fascinated, and I hadn't gone deep enough to know what is it really compared to the story. There's a lot of marketing, a lot of story, a lot of different people who are walk-ins and various kinds of things, and to do that, you got to have a story, I think.
Yeah.
And they market that story, and doesn't mean that it isn't fascinating and full of delightful things, but it can lead you off in a lot of different ways in a disguised way.
Yeah, well, fictionalizing what might be true.
Yeah.
Takes a lot of discernment to weed through what is being fictionalized to leverage that story to a certain end, or it is in other terms, like a scientific process, there are delineable steps to A to B to C to D that you can analyze and look at, and then filter through your interior space and knowing and your emotional body. Fiction kind of it can be, and not always, can be misleading.
Absolutely.
And used for misleading.
Yeah, well, that's
especially if the tools of discernment aren't available.
Look at it today with all the quote-unquote truthers or whatever they want to call themselves.
Sure.
Percentage of truth and a whole bunch of stuff to lead you off on another path in a fascinating kind of way, but that discernment, like I'm going through a big phase now where I can't get enough of redoing and correcting the misinformation that I've learned. I'm like addicted to getting things correct. And like when talking with Crow, and I'm very grateful for him because that's how we met through, I've done 3 interviews with him and we've had a great time. And I really appreciate that. But his work on the sun, compared to all my analysis and beliefs about how far away, how big is it, what is it really, the moon, all that, that solar system, flat earth, various studies about what is the shape of the earth really, and what's the dome, in the ice dome, and did NASA get through that? I mean, I'm studying all of that kind of stuff. And I love it. I can't get enough of it. Like I'm recalibrating because I don't want to be out there teaching the misinformation, no matter how seductive it might be.
Right. And the clarity of our own perception involves us being willing to change perspectives and take on new information in light of available capacitance within us.
Yeah.
To expand the horizons of what we think we know.
Yes.
To get at the root of what we actually know. Right.
Yeah.
So, yeah, there's a lot there.
And I love studying these things and the ancient mysteries and the off-campus stuff I call Earth School, and then all the wherever the other entities come from, living inside the Earth, down under the ocean, out past the ice wall in Antarctica, not necessarily up, but out.
So I am going to clarify, because I hear you are of the, and I don't want to get too far into this because it's kind of in sense of the conversation, I'd like to have a non-issue in some ways. You do find that the evidence backs the claim that this is likely flat or some kind of planar.
Yeah. With a dome over the top, there's things. I look at what the pilots say, other people say. What did NASA do? How come the rockets bend when they get up to the ice wall or bounce off it up there on the dome? All kinds of different type of evidence and things that people have done that do not make sense. Like in spinning, a globe spinning at a certain amount, and the oceans aren't spinning off the planet. You hold a glass of water and it's not spinning, and the water isn't spinning out of the glass. I mean, what is going on here? We need to know.
I mean, if you look at it in terms of waveform mechanics, there are possible models, and I'm not going to say that they're proofs
Okay.
necessarily, but there's possible models within either of those shapes to explain either perspective.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I am perfectly willing to open up the possibility that for you, it is flat, and for another person, it is round, and that both are happening simultaneously.
Yeah, like parallel realities, even, both round and flat. Now, I'm not out there saying it is flat. I'm saying I'm considering with the different evidence I've seen,
I get it.
A high likelihood that it might be flatter than we thought.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I see merit in both of those perspectives, and I lean into holding them both at the same time because I find there's a lot of useful meat intellectually and emotionally in being able to hold those paradoxes and look through the lens of them.
Would you say that parallel reality is another way of containing those two different thoughts? And one it's flat, and another one it's round, and another one it's concave?
Since it seems to me that now is the thing that's happening on some level, simultaneously expressed, that I can step from one polarity of belief into another if I have the space within me to allow that.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
And that
you can be flexible without being wimpy.
Correct. Actually, it takes a lot of fortitude to hold that space.
Yeah, absolutely.
And a lot of capacitance. And so the place that I find it most interesting in today's overlay is this concept that there is a bifurcation happening of belief systems and how those belief systems manifest in the experience that we have in this realm.
Or do you think they're designed to divide us? Or is it to be able to hold dualities and hold things?
Or are we designing it to divide ourselves?
Yes.
By over-relating to a realm of opposition. Because it seems to me that this is a realm of opposition.
Mm-hmm.
And, if we are to take the concept that abracadabra or one of those types of, with my word I create.
And even abrahadabra, there's a couple of them there.
Yes, for sure. We can dig into that
story too. Yeah.
I love tangential stories, and there is a sense of tangent. This angular momentum spins us off into different trajectories and pathways. And my spin, for metaphor's sake, my spin is in a sense of perspective different than your spin, and we may end up in completely different aspects of now.
Mm-hmm.
While we're looking in at the same thing from a different angel, as Crow would say, or
that's
angle.
I like that, and I spell now often NAO.
Yeah,
like the Tao, the Tao.
Yep, the now. Yeah, right. I like that.
Because the spellings, and then I spell fun, PHUN, because it's a more educated fun.
I recall this.
Yeah,
I'm more
I like that whole thing because it reflects a consciousness where the spellings getting into words and how they're spelled and in what language, how important that is in creating realities.
Sure, let's dig into that.
I mean, I'm really into that whole language and influencing the thoughts and where the language came from, the purpose of it, Babel, Tower of Babel, all of that, different, dividing us by languages, that type of thing.
So what is the nature of naming in your perspective?
Well, on one level, there's control.
Sure.
You name something and certain beings that don't want to tell you their name because they don't want you to have access and control over them where you say their name and they must appear some way. Mm-hmm. And that stuff is known in history and abused and used by putting names on it. But some of the names make a container that controls it within whatever that name or nickname I have a bunch of nicknames, and they're all fun, and I'm really been enjoying that.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, my own shape shifting within which.
Well, like your name on the Zoom link here is Randolphin.
Yeah,
I love it
because I have an affinity with dolphins. I've had an interesting experience with them up on a Pleiadian ship back in 1989, back when the earthquake happened, and went into the control room up there, and there was a aquarium, circular control room with dolphins swimming in it, and they could telepathically work the controls of the ship. I go, okay. So I do have even though I don't have, Joan Ocean is a friend of mine, it's over, and there's a movie out called Ocean. It's about her life. She's fantastic over on the Big Island in Hawaii. But, it's not like I've swam in the waters here that much with them and had all these profound things that I could write down and tell people what happened. And the dolphins came up and they did this and that. But in the dream world and other things, I've had some very profound in dolphin dream time, more profound than my physical awake life with dolphins. And that was fun because I love everything about the dolphins and much about what they do and can do and where they come from and all of that type of thing. So the Randolphin is fine.
Yeah. So my wife and I were playing around with this concept of naming, and it came up with a number of things. But one of the things that was being talked about was the Shakespeare little spell. A rose by any other name is still so sweet. I think I have that correct. And that concept came up.
Yeah, it's still a rose, no matter what you call it. It's a rose. It's a rose. It's a rose. Yeah.
Yeah. And so
that's what arose in me to say at that moment. That's it.
Yeah. Right. And so we were playing with your name because you had committed to coming on the show and whatnot. And I'm like, Randy Masters. It kind of connotates this. Randy in the Western lexicon has this connotation of virile, forward.
Especially if I went to Australia, I'm not going to go by Randy.
Yeah, and the virile curiosity to explore in a very high sense is the mastery. So you're like, you get a hard on for digging into shit at a very deep level.
Yeah. Nice. It isn't any layers.
We had a good laugh with that. I'm glad you're having a good laugh.
Oh, I had a good time with that, and I don't always use it, in a fun way. But my girlfriend calls me Randolphino, and that's been my favorite nickname. And in fact, I just love that. I can feel that it's like how have I morphed? So my nicknames show that morphing. And then if I'm just playing around and I want to be doing, sitting on the lotus and meditating all day and doing those things, I'm Randy G.
Randy G.
And I'm working on ascension with only one S. But in the meantime, I'm straddling the world where ascension has two S's. So bear with me. The kind of a thing. All in fun. Because I'm not going to get up there and wear Sanskrit clothes and give my name a Sanskrit name in order to more spiritualize marketing. I kind of have I'm not in favor of that. I laugh at the beings that do that. Now, now you're someone, you know how it is. Yeah. So Randy kind of puts a smile on almost even serious conversations.
Yeah.
And Randolphin definitely does, but I don't go out and speak at conferences and I'm Randolph. That's more my fun world.
Yeah. Yeah. So you differentiate between giving conferences and your fun world.
Well, I have fun doing the conferences, yes. But when I'm talking about a fun world where, just kind of let it all hang out and I can, like kind of a little bit of what we're doing.
Yeah.
Here right today, but in some conferences I have to speak more scientifically or depending on the conference about certain things and have people take me appropriately seriously, but not overly seriously.
Yeah. Right. So back to that naming thing. The
yes,
power
exactly.
The power of naming something. Do you feel like changing its name changes its essence, in the sense that, like, through an alchemical lens, precipitation of that essence through the ether coagulates or condenses around the structure of that name.
Oh, let me show you a geometric metaphor for that. Just a second.
Great. So, yeah.
Yeah. See, I have art all over my house and geometries hanging on the ceilings, and
yes,
I can just pull something off the wall.
I'm with you on that.
Yeah, So here's an Icosa dodeca carved precisely in quartz. Natural quartz. Yes. It's optical. With triangular faces and pentagonal faces at this level, and straight edges where you get the masculine part. And I have the same thing. And this is important.
Yeah.
And here it is in curved space.
Right.
The feminine approach, let's say. Mm-hmm. And this is like the Regenesis crystal, but this is one that's the next octave of it. Instead of 4 hoops, you can see all the angles are curved angles.
Yes.
This is very important, this aspect. And you hear, like in the Emerald Tablets, talking about both avoiding some of these hounds that are chasing him, that are moving in 90 degree angles.
Moving at 90-degree angles.
Exactly.
And he's got to spiral back towards
and curving and what that rounded. Well, it's very interesting in terms of the metaphor, the straight edge and the curved space, and they must dialogue and they understand each other. Mm-hmm. Very well. Better here than some human behavior doesn't always understand,
Yeah.
That's another response to your question in terms of a geometric metaphor in a response to what you were just saying.
Okay, so
I could say more, but I mean,
please do.
And how would you phrase the question now? Where we evolved the question to?
Where we evolved the question to is, by changing the name of something, does it precipitate change in the thing itself?
I think the alchemy, that there's an essence beyond here. Like when a child is born, they can tell you their name if you know how to listen. And rather than the parents giving it a name for all of their personal reasons, which might not be in harmony with the true essence of that child and where they come from and what they're here to do. In all respect,
Yeah.
I was named after my father, and I respect that. When I was born, I'm junior. In other words, that type of thing. Okay, I respect that. But I think there is a type of essence that transcends that deep down. But and how it plays out in the world, and how you move through the world, and who you interact, and what dynamics you interact with, and processes.
Uh-huh.
The different names attract different types of parallel and possible realities based on that resonance. And there's an alchemy in that. So if I go by Randy, there's certain things that happen with that, different than Randolph. And if I want to sign something formally on a form and I put Randolph, okay, I'm attracting a different energy, and I put it there on purpose. I don't put Randy there, so they take it lightly and don't respect the more essence that needs to be respected, not out of ego, but out of not manipulating your name. Right. But I think in alchemy, and what you call things and how you spell it is very, very interesting. And like in different languages, and they may be similar, but the spelling is slightly different. Like color in the UK, COLOUR.
Yes.
Now there's an alchemy in that spelling that's different than COLOR.
Yeah, I find myself instinctually changing between those two spellings in different contexts.
I do too.
Now, I'd love to know more about why that changes it in your study.
Well, sometimes I'm diving down into I mean more about this than what I'm saying. And OUR,
I gathered,
recognizes that. I can say certain things, and I can not say certain things. And by not saying it, I'm still saying it if you know how to listen. Mm-hmm. Or if you care to listen. In between the lines, where what I really have to say is between the lines, not in my words.
Right.
And there's alchemy between the lines and the spaces. And the same with music when I'm composing. It's how you compose the spaces. And in a jazz way of saying that, listen to Miles Davis and his back in the day when he could play sparsely and say a whole lot and play one note, and where he places that note, the space before, the space after, is part of what then when he does play the note, gives that note additional energies and meanings and placement. It's super beautiful about what he did, not when he's just playing bebop and running a whole bunch of notes all over the place. Okay. Yeah. And I did all that stuff too, but it doesn't hold meaning for me now to play that way. I think it communicates
it's similar to qualifying a statement or removing that qualifier from the statement has a different weight and energy in the way it's heard, right?
Yeah, and see with Miles,
and what it means.
And he came to me in a dream one time, and I definitely got a download from him, regardless of Miles's personality and behaviors in the world and all of that kind of stuff. I met a lot of the famous musicians, and backstage, there's really a different reality sometimes. And some of their behaviors were like, they shouldn't be able to play music that beautiful with that kind of a behavior. I might say temporarily, I'm going to block you from being able to do things till you clean up your act because of what people respect them. They open their heart to them. And then some of these people put people down, including people who ask for their autograph, various things, there's a lack of respect a lot that people think that because they're famous and have accomplished certain things that they can behave differently, treat people differently. And that's very interesting to me. And but with Miles, a lot of times he'll play the ninth of a chord. So if you play a C major chord, he'll play a D. And that note wants to resolve up or down, or it can hang out there, but it has a different beauty to it, not being part of the basic root thirds and fifths and that type of thing in a chord. It's very grounded in the triad. That's from the upper overtones, ninths, 11ths, and 13ths. And so he plays a ninth a lot of times. If he's going to play one note, I would say chances are it'll be a ninth. And because of the statement he makes with that note, that the other notes in the chord don't make that statement. They don't have that, you're kind of implying a higher realm, the upper extensions and so on in the chords as music history has evolved.
Yeah.
Every 100 years or so, it goes up to the next overtone before triads, and then, roots and fifths a lot in the Renaissance and that fourths. And then, in the Baroque era, seventh chords with Bach, roots, thirds, fifths, and sevenths, sometimes a sixth, but mostly that. Then by the time you get to Beethoven, you've got ninths. Even Beethoven's ninth reminds you, it's moving up higher and higher in the overtones. And by the time you get to Chopin, in European thought here, history, you've got 13ths in the chords, roots, thirds, fifths, 11ths, ninths, 11ths, and 13ths. And then that's pretty much where it went, other than some 20th century stuff, which mostly I don't care to listen to, Schoenberg and a lot of that stuff. I had to study it, deal with it. In fact, one of the thoughts that was going around about the spiritual directive between Schoenberg's 12-tone music in the 20th century was to break up the negative thought fields left over from World War II in the music as a way of, now I don't enjoy it. If people come over for dinner, I'm not going to put Schoenberg on. Never.
It's possible that you don't need to break up the overtones of the Second World War for yourself.
No, I understand.
Maybe that's why you don't enjoy it.
I don't. Yeah, you wonder, but still, I mean, think about what did different composers come here to do? What did they? Because I have past life with certain composers, and I don't make it public, but so I brought that in with me because when I first started composing, like a sophomore in high school, I just sat down and did it. Nobody trained me in composing, and I still have those songs, and I don't have to change one thing about any of them. Because of all the stuff I've learned later, I don't have to go, now I got to go back and update. No, they were on. Yeah. How did they get on if I hadn't been trained in that? I brought it with me. And then when there was a code in timing, that dimension opened up and then I just did it.
Right.
How did you learn to do that? Because it was my timing and I just did it, which I find very, very interesting. You see that with certain musicians. They pick up an instrument they've never played before. They're really playing.
I had an experience like that with one of. So I have learned. I both have stepped into having aptitude pre-built into my experience here, and I've had some really phenomenal mentors as well. One of which was a guy who lovingly was nicknamed Bluey, and Bluey is a phenomenon of himself. Now, we were at a friend of mine's house, my friend Simeon's, and he sat down to the piano and started playing this beautiful song, and stepped away from the piano and says, "Wow." Sim says, "Wow, where did you learn to play piano?" He's like, "I've never played piano. I sat down and let it happen. And the ghost of your grandma came in, and that's what she wanted you to hear. And so I allowed it."
That's what he told you.
Yeah.
Wow. Wow. It just keeps going more dimensional every part of your sentence as your sentence goes. And another part of it. That is like totally fun. I can dig it. And that channeling and being in the now and opening up because it's in the field. Like you can know everything. There's nothing hidden if you open to that part of the field. It's in the field. It's in the Akashic records.
Mm-hmm. So in your journey of getting to the place that you are now, obviously you came in with a clarity and access to that.
Yeah.
Were you able then to take that access and further it by learning actual techniques that are transmittable in our day-to-day?
Yeah, and I did that.
To yourself?
I've been teaching music nonstop since '68.
Mm-hmm.
Techniques, composing, arranging techniques, playing techniques on guitar, keyboard, trumpet, percussion instruments. I played all that stuff. And transmissible there. And then when I got in the late 80s into sacred geometry and that timing code went off, I couldn't get enough of it. I dove I come home from a gig and set up and do some sacred geometry at night after getting home late from a music gig. Yeah. I couldn't wait to discover the next thing I was discovering. And I got energized by that. And then I could teach useful information from that, not just fascinating information, right, and entertaining information, but useful information on the spirituality aspects of sacred geometry and ways to use it to better your environment, yourself, and your journey, and understanding like the language of the birds and the dove that we were talking about, the language of creation, the natural laws of creation, in which shape science is a big part of it.
Right.
And color and sound and shape. And I take all three of those as like main things that I work.
How do they relate to each other?
They all have relationships and ratios too. I found the musical ratios and everything I've studied almost in color. I take in all the things just about that I study in geometry and I look at the ratios in there, and musical usefulness of those ratios and musical analogs of those ratios that are like instead of square root of 2 being a non-rational ratio, there's a lot of ancient ratios for the tritone, the diminished fifth or the augmented fourth, like 7/5 and, 17/12 and all of that kind of stuff that the ancients had in their musical ratios that they used. And I find those ratios in geometry, but maybe geometry might have some non-rational ratio, which is another whole thing about what the non-rational world, like with pi. I studied that history of pi, and there's a lot of different uses of pi. And in my work with the years of studies with my Egyptian studies, they had very many different values of pi. And none of them that I found were the non-rational version of pi that science uses. I don't even use that value of pi.
Yeah, I've heard similar takes on pi before. What's striking me as something that I'd like to dig into is through the lens, so I'm hearing you talk about angles and colors and the relationships and correlations, correspondences, if you would.
Yeah, the angle is where you change the angle and it bends the light and you get a different color, just that, like that.
Yeah, well, there's also, I know that you have mentioned in other interviews, Dr. Kareem's work with BG3 and biogeometry and his views of angle and discerning the quality, the color quality, as he calls it,
Right.
of those angles. What I'm curious about is what in your churning of these things have you discovered about how different angles, shapes, colors, sounds, how do they interact and exchange and maybe even alter our physiology? You know?
Well, my deeper studies, I had years of stuff on the Egyptian part when I was dealing deep with the flower of life work, like I talked about, and I worked with Wes Bateman, who passed away a few years ago. And he had like part of a 30-year study of all the known measurements of the 3 pyramids of Giza.
Mm-hmm.
And I was part of that project and discovered musical ratios in the numbers as measurements instead of cubits or feet or centimeters or whatever units. The ratios between things, and musical ratios built all over the architecture.
Yes, absolutely.
And different uses of pi in for instance, and all of that.
Just if you're able to, a quick example of what you mean by different uses for pi.
Well, okay, here's an example. One use that you don't see talked about so much, because most people might round it off 3.1416. That's as far as they round it up there, 4 decimal points, which is 10 thousandths of a unit. And pretty much a lot of engineering only goes to a 10 thousandths. So you don't even have to have it any more than that.
Yeah.
Then you have Babylonian pi, 3 1/8, 25 over 8, 3.125. And that's found in geometry. And you can take an equilateral triangle, take the center of that, and you'll get in a 3-4-5 triangle, 3.125 from 4 using that value of pi. Yeah. And there's a lot and I found that value of pi in analyzing the spectral lines of elements in the periodic table, especially hydrogen. There it is, right there. Ratio of different hydrogen spectral lines being exactly Babylonian pi. And another one was another Egyptian pi that's not talked about so much, 256 over 81, which is 3.16. And there's a 9 decimal repeating sequence. It's a Pythagorean interval of an octave and a minor 6 in Pythagorean and ancient Chinese and tuning. But when you want to square the circle in area, and you want to be the area of the square to be 64, and you want the area of the circle to be 64, the edge of the square is 8, the diameter of the circle is 9. And for both of those to end up with the 64, you have to use 256 over 81 for your value of pi.
Right.
And you will get that. That's the only value of pi that makes them both come out. And that's put there in their hieroglyphics and notes. Well, they knew what that was, and they knew what that was with geometry by showing you in the squaring of the circle. You measure it, and there it is, 8 square, and the circle 9. No other value of pi is going to have those areas come out the same for area. I'm not talking about, volume. And each one, there's different things like that. And then you get the typical 22 over 7 Archimedean pi, 3 1/7. And we were often taught that as a quick solution when we were in school without knowing the history of it. Let's just use that. That's simple. And then NASA, I was told, because I did a lot of work with some data that I got on NASA studying the rings of Saturn, and I discovered a bunch that was not part of the NASA discoveries.
Yeah.
But I got it directly from the guy at NASA who's ahead of the Saturn Ring project. And that's a fascinating study, as those rings are being made by highly advanced ET ships that they've spotted and photographed in the rings as pinched plasma fields.
Yes.
And there's more rings, but anyway. And NASA used 3.15 for a reason. So when you get into whatever they know about space-time, whether they tell the truth about it or not, they had a reason for using 3.15 and not other. And 3.15 is found when you study Mayan architectures and Mayan stuff. It fits perfectly into their measurements, which is another, Well,
when you're getting into plasmoid interactions, the description of your boundary condition, which is described by your use of which pi, in my thinking, would have greatly different outcomes in the actuality of what that does.
Right.
So,
well, now my favorite is key lime pie. That's the one I like.
Oh, I love key lime pie. My sister makes a mean key lime pie.
That's the stuff, right? A mean one that smiles. Yeah, totally.
Yeah.
But that was just an example. I found like 12 different uses of different kind of pi values in studying hydrogen. I did a lot of work on the math because as the prime element, at least think of it as the prime element after some point in creation. It's fascinating, the mathematics within the pi if you use the right values. And those values are built into measurements in the pyramids, which is what Wes and I discovered. It's not in the other books about the pyramids, which you could fill a room full of books. But that was what Wes started. And then I took it way farther and I took it into music and put music ratios on everything I was studying. So that integrative looking at creation and shape, frequencies, sound, ratios, color, those are all different aspects, including the harmonics of the spelling of words and the pronunciation of words, creating different overtones, and some of the words you only can sing it. You can't say it because you can't try to say it. When you try to say it, you don't get the harmonics right. So it doesn't produce that alchemical holographic model in reality that would happen if you pronounce it right with the right overtones and, though Leslie talked about, undertones of mirror image, as below, as above overtones, so below undertones. And when you say certain things right in a lot of the sacred languages, they create realities with that.
Yes.
With their harmonics. I watched the Jutsu monks doing that live, and they're holding a dorje, and one of the lead singers is moving that dorje around, and I know he's tweaking the room with their sounds. And so I started using dorjes with tuning forks as another technique, because that dorje, at least the basic one, is two figure eights at 90-degree angles, and kind of a 0 point in the middle, where you can change your consciousness, and what comes out the other side from what you're toning is altered in some way.
With that shape in the center is also the shape of like the vertices of a torus.
That's right. Exactly.
If my memory serves me.
Yeah, that whole torus, and it's not a Model Ford,
Yeah.
What people should be driving today probably is the fiat currency,
Most people are driving that. And driving it into the ground too.
Yeah, no, that's crazy. And wild stuff, these vehicles, these Earth vehicles, Well,
I'm interested in these Earth vehicles.
Yes.
The primary technology. And that I feel like you mentioned Drunvalo off air and a little bit leading into this, but he said something to the effect of that to fine-tune this vessel as the primary expression of that technology that is inward and inward knowing leads us towards greater knowledge and union with creation, and that the externalization of those technologies leads us to a bounded infinity rather than endless infinity, if you will.
Right. And so, scientists have a big problem with how to deal with the infinite.
Yeah.
And that's where you get that other value of pi that goes on and on and on. How can you measure anything with something like that? Only in a spiral, it goes on forever, not in a circle.
Right. Yeah. So,
and I agree with our body vehicle, as the Creator gave us this body with as an expression of the Creator's body, further expression and creativity of the Creator's body, and all the codes and things are there if they get ignited and integrated. And how you live according to the knowledge that you're getting, how you put that knowledge to use to better oneself if it needs. It's already bettered, but the realization of that betterment, you might say, in some kind of way, and how you express that in the world to have things be better for your footsteps. Wherever you go, what kind of footprint are you laying down? And I love that.
Yeah, I do.
Whether
I
it's
do
earth
as well.
shoes or shoes with rubber soles, whatever,
Yeah. Rubber sole. There's another.
Yeah, Beatles.
S- I I'm going to bounce back to something you said before and bring us into a previous path, and that was the use of what wasn't there by Miles Davis in things like Sketches of Spain or whatnot. And there's
I
a
love that.
sense, oh yeah, there's a sense in that, cultivating silence in ourselves so that when we do bring our word forth, it has impact in what it is we are clearly expressing in the world. Does that?
Yeah, it preceded and followed by silence.
Mm-hmm. So,
not filled in with a bunch of mind stuff
right.
in between as filler. I mean, a lot of people are very uncomfortable with silence. So they've developed the art of filler very well.
Yeah, that was what I was talking about earlier with my work with mindset, the stories we tell ourselves to ourselves.
Yeah.
Most people have a story going on in their head 1,000 miles an hour at all times, and all of a sudden
And so they're not
right there.
They're in the story, right?
If your story is right here, how can you have space to see anything clearly?
Mm-hmm.
Right? So, yeah, cool. Is where
So that whole thing of being between pages or on the page together with somebody, between pages, and the pages are turning or can turn. So that thing is morphing, and that now you try to grab that. Are you on that page, or you went through that page, and for a split moment you were on that page? But if you argue for it, you could be caught in the past in just a moment.
Yeah, swept away in the story.
That's right. Absolutely.
Yeah, I was talking to a friend of mine who is working at a fairly, let's say he's digging within himself to find a very deep level of clarity and helping him through that process. And I was relating this thing that came to me a long time ago, that being in that space is a lot like a trust fall. You're falling, and that sensation of falling in an allowance that one absolves himself of the need to reach on and grab onto anything for the illusion of safety. Grab an edge so you can hold on to whatever that concept is. And what is that limit, that space for you? Like, do you, what's your path to that space? Because it seems like you have it.
Yeah, and I think also, like, if you jump out of a plane, although I haven't done that, and your parachute doesn't open, if you surrender to that moment deep enough, something, spirit might help you land in a tree, you land somewhere, you don't break anything. How did that happen that would only happen in a graceful moment where you surrendered to grace, and it then transcended certain laws of, well, you should be all broken up and smashed and unidentifiable. You can't identify yourself now. You've fallen out of a plane and smacked on the earth. But in that now, things have happened to people that have fallen, jumped from space and survived. I mean, how did they do that? Yeah. And other kinds of things too. Now, then you can talk about people who were washed overboard on a ship and did everything they could, and this is a true story, to swim and dog paddle, and then the waves would keep burying them. And all of a sudden, instead of just hoping for a moment to grab a quick breath, they kept being suspended, and they found out that a seal was underneath them and propping them up.
Yeah.
I don't mean a Navy SEAL. I'm talking.
Yeah, no, I get you. A real SEAL.
A real SEAL, and like that dynamic between those animals' wisdom and coming to aid other creatures, only to me happens in that greater grace field, which is what I call that.
You call that type a form of surrender in a way.
It's deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I have this.
You can't even think about the word surrender because you have surrendered, you know.
Yeah.
It's so deep like that. But and there's a lot of stories of creatures in nature helping people. So I got a couple of years ago, I was walking on the beach by my house, and I got bit by what seemed to have been a brown recluse spider.
Mm-hmm.
What's it doing on the beach? Okay, that's one thing. You know, I don't live in a heavy recluse spider area anyway.
Yeah.
How did that happen? I light little bite. I thought, I just want to make sure it wasn't a tick, because we live in an area with ticks all over, you know, thanks to the work back east and designing the ticks with, you know.
Yeah, I've dug into that.
Yeah, it's a deep, deep thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, and then pretty soon it's eating my flesh. And I finally got some special salve, American Indian thing that cleared that out. But it was eating the flesh on my leg. Necrotic spider that it was. Very crazy. How did that happen? Then some of my shaman friends all say, well, Randy, you now have spider medicine. Mm-hmm. Okay. I can believe that. I'm not sure I know what I can do knowing that. Maybe I can relax and not fight it and wonder, you know, what's happening, and be grateful that now I have spider medicine, and hopefully I can find a way that I can make that useful. Mm-hmm. That spider gave me a gift, and I don't need to be angry at that spider, even though it ate some flesh and it was ugly and uncomfortable.
It was in the native parlance. It was a flesh offering.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
And because of that, I met my girlfriend, because I was there in a place getting IVs and peptide injections and ozone stuff to try to clear that up. And I met her there. So the spider helped us meet. I mean, thank you.
Well, that is,
you know.
I wrote a poem at one point in my life, and the first line of it was, "The spider weaves its web between our worlds," and it was to a woman. So there is a feminine nature to that is those connective lines.
And then the geometry of and the language and the spider webs and the geometry of the webs and the strength of certain material in the spider webs. I'm totally phenomenal. Stronger than steel in some cases.
Yeah, there are a number of spiders that are considered to be like up to 400 times the tensile strength of steel.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that, these creatures, subtle creatures, you know, and I think they're making things like bulletproof vests or I don't know, different things out of spider web.
Well, there was some science in Australia early on in so-called genetic engineering where they made a goat lactate spider silk, and they were using that and it's progressed since then, but that's a whole longer tangent. But
that's what they were doing down south, huh?
Yeah. That appeared in the newspaper of all places. It was the only place I ever saw it, and I couldn't find it ever again, so I don't know that I can verify that claim.
You think purposeful benefit?
I read it.
From that?
What's that?
Think purposeful benefit happened from that?
Well, let's put it this way. Any form of technology, be it language, a gun, a tractor, in one person's hand can be used to benefit the service of all, or variations therein, or in somebody else's hand can be used to push over your house with that tractor without asking.
I like the phrase I got from one of my friends, service to creator and creation.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. And so I think it's often misinterpreted that the technology is the thing that is of ill. And it's actually our ability to discern the appropriate path for ourselves in how we choose to integrate that into our experience.
Mm-hmm.
And so, I think we're in a process right now of developing the clarity as a collective to know how to use our awareness and focus it appropriately to the higher service of creation and creativity, and our generative nature within that energy.
And to be linked up vertically, as I call it, with the creator, so we do the right thing with our creativity and our knowledge and our brain waves and IQ, and you name it, you know.
And that's what you were talking about with when you step into higher order magnitudes of capacitance within reality,
Yes.
those creations of our imagination, if we have a lack of clarity in our knowing, in our thinking, in our emotional body, we create more mayhem.
You could have the
And
next species.
It's the same here. It just happens to be a lot slower in its manifestation and a little bit more manageable as a learning paradigm.
To teach us by slowing it down a little. The stuff we will really walk in a fine double-edged sword that seems to get sharpened, whoever is keeping it sharp, with how we use our creativity to not have the next species extinction.
Right, yeah.
But carrying, like at Atlantis and other places that created their destructions by not paying attention to certain things or getting carried away with power, and all the different things that happened in the different destructions of Atlantis, they're still playing out in certain ways now. I don't think all the destructions of Atlantis have happened. I think there's more potential that we could change now.
There is potential. I think that potential for change is that we are in a place now of, so we were in a paradigm of projection outward into the overlay of authorities outside ourselves and social constructs and custom. And we're at a process right now of the in-breath of looking inward at how our own authority can be vitalized and focused to that creative process as a collective.
And changes what we attract, and things shifting a parallel reality for something that could be a destruction. We change that internally and it doesn't even happen.
That we're on the same page on that one. So.
Yeah, absolutely. All these people thinking, here in California, that San Andreas is going to go off, and next thing you know, it's California Island again, like it was in early days. The early maps, 1600s and early, showing California as an island. Very interesting, and all of these truthers and whoever they are out there with information, disinformation, fear. Trying to convince us that the next certain kind of level of destruction, and there's quakes going off and certain kind of volcanoes going off. And what are humans doing? Manipulating the weather, manipulating earthquakes, manipulating typhoons and hurricanes, and stepping in with an arrogance above nature rather than cooperating with nature to understand external and internal nature and the laws of that.
Yeah, there's an impact to those manipulations, which are fictitious overlays, even though they are real in a sense. They're fictitious overlays of unreality that if we as endless creativity in divine nature focus and overly identify with that information embedded in that fiction, we create more of that. And I think there's a tendency, but within a lot of those circles, to over-identify with negative information and negative stories, and that perpetuate the thing that people are against. And in negation, we often propagate that which we espouse to be opposed to. And
whatever is in us that gets attracted to those darker realities or darker outcomes or possibilities, and people get addicted to the adrenaline of following that type of stuff.
And so what have you found that is an effective method of moving beyond those addictive tendencies? Where do you think those addictive tendencies arise from?
Well, I think they've been programmed into us through genetic manipulation over the eras. Anunnakis and other genetic scientists who have programmed those destructions. Like they said, we better step in here lest they become as powerful as we are. That's a rephrasing of that. Like, we better do something. We can't just turn this human genetic thing that we've been manipulating loose, or they're going to go beyond us. So we better interfere. And I think they played with different parts of the brain, putting these different tendencies and things in there. We can wake up to them And I can remind myself when I'm looking at some stuff on the internet, oh, I'm choosing to watch this now. Maybe I want to know about it, and I can shift my brain waves, my thinking or something about it, and maybe make a difference or be part of making a difference. But I got to watch what I'm allowing it to detune me. I don't want it to. It's my responsibility if I choose to watch it to not allow it to detune me.
Right. And I mean, those of us who have looked into the technologies, there is quite a lot of bioentrainment and things of that nature. And
I think it's real deep in terms of what that DNA is, and the music in the DNA, and the geometry in the DNA, and the star codes in the DNA. Now, whether we can have it work properly, or whether somebody's thrown some monkey wrenches in there so that DNA malfunctions and doesn't fully, like with the pineal gland, things just don't wake up. With fluoride, chemtrails, all the other stuff designed to detune us from being in that God mind through our pineal gland.
Mhm.
And yet here it is in big sculptures in the Vatican and all around, and ancients new things. And how many people's third eyes are open? I don't think that many, by the behaviors.
More and more all the time.
Yes, definitely.
Been my experience.
Yeah, more and more. But I mean, when I look at the total population, let's say, of surface dwellers here, okay,
Yeah.
those of us.
It's multivariant, you know. There seems to me to be a direct correspondence between the sky clock, if you will,
Right.
the celestial bodies, and the timing of that, and how it relates with our incarnation and embodiment here. And that field is really shifting right now, and I feel it.
Oh, yeah. That
And
sky clock, coming to terms with that, even acknowledging it or remembering the sky clock, where we've been programmed to forget about it and go along with these other timings and mistimings. I was in that temple in Egypt on I led three trips there. And in this one has the sky clock on the ceiling, which is very, very interesting. And the walking through the door is a low ceiling with like cement or granite. And I bumped my head on that, and it was a loud, woo, wow. Lucky I didn't crack something open. You know, it was an opening. Hey, Randy, you know, this is important. Where you are right now and what was above your head. You know,
pay attention.
I didn't understand the sky clock at the level that I understand it now when I was right there where it was documented on the ceiling. So it was definitely having an impact on me. Kind of spun me out for a few minutes, but I was fine. I didn't have to get any medical treatment, but wow, it was loud. You could hear it.
Yeah.
You know, a bump on my consciousness.
Sometimes the Creator gives us a nice knock on the head when we're not paying attention.
This was one of those, yeah.
And I feel like we're at the precipice, to bring it back to what I was mentioning, why the sky clock came up in my field, is we are at that precipice of either getting a big knock on the head from Creator, or stepping into the attention that can see things with more clarity and move into a new relationship and way of moving in this creative space, right?
And that's the essence of studying and living with and swimming in natural law. To get with the program.
Yeah. So what does
cover the program, remember the program, undo the blocks to remembering the program, and get with the program, and then live accordingly.
And so, for those who
my integration, in other words, in your questions about
what was that? I missed
my integration in the Renaissance type of life is integrating these things and seeing by connecting the dots. You know, there's my feeling about things in reality. I look at a flower differently. I look at a lot of things differently. I hear them differently, see them, taste them, feel them, smell them, think about it differently because of their interaction with the Creator and marvel of things that the Creator has put into different creatures.
Yeah.
And the frequencies, and how trees communicate with sound frequencies through their roots with each other. And what they know, the Akashic record that a tree knows, several hundred years or more old, and what that tree actually knows. Beyond the number of years since it sprouted, you might say, Where did it get the rest of that? It tied into that field of knowingness and truth of the Creator.
Yeah, the metaphor of the mustard seed.
Yes, exactly.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Potolo is the one for that mustard seed.
What's that?
Potolo, which is the third sun in the Sirius star system that scientists didn't know for a while, but the Dogon tribe did. Yeah. And they knew all about what happens from Sirius C. And they called it P-O and then T-O-L-O, Potolo, and all that stuff about the mustard seed, that little star compared to the other two larger ones in Sirius.
Oh, I've never heard this correlation.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I mean, I take my study of that seriously.
I gathered.
But I do change the spelling. And when I do, look at the different consciousness in S-I-R-I-U-S than S-E-R-I-O-U-S, you know?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah, right.
If it's not spelled the same, it doesn't mean the same thing. It's something I've heard said.
Yeah, and dolphins come from their birth in one of the water planets up there, for sure. And I believe even here now they travel in their Merkabahs to and from Sirius star system. And I was taken there once in a special experience in this life to a planet in the Sirius star system and met with this being Isis, and that was very interesting. You know,
one that has had
scientist, right?
Yeah. That's a name that has had a lot of conflation, confusion, and
especially since Obama got in
there and misdirection. Yeah, ISIL.
Yeah, and then ISIS, and so gee.
So, for those who might not know, who is this ISIS character, both in history and in your experience? Synopsis?
Well, I think that being is a creator being. Some of the recent talk from ancient talk about that is basically like an Anunnaki genetic scientist of creation. Then there's all the goddess worship stuff that sometimes can be very misleading and be a lot of New Age la land about that and who Isis was, especially when you get into the studies of what really is Sophia. That's a huge study. I'm reviewing my work and knowledge on that now before I teach more deeper things about it. I'm correcting misunderstandings and overinflating understandings about that whole aspect of the Sophia nature, the goddess nature, but not in a New Age manipulated way. And that's tricky because you can get stuff on it. I mean, James Hurtak wrote a book, on, the Sophia stuff after the Keys of Enoch. Interesting. From like a very intellectual male point of view of a lot of that, for instance. But for us to wake up to the feminine understanding. So I had some questions. And I went to bed one night and had one of those soul travel out-of-body places. And I went there and had a friend that went with me. And I saw her and I said, "That's Isis." And she was like resting. "Let's wake her up. I want to talk to her." And she was disguised as Sekhmet, which is true because Sekhmet is like a protector lioness that protects her, which is deep in the Egyptian and pre-Egyptian and the science of the lion beings from other places in the universe that were around here and what that's about, embracing all of that history. So, and then that gets back to the goddess codes that track back there through the Magdalene lineage and other lineages. It's real deep in understanding natural law and the feminine, like we did the metaphors with the crystal and the curve space, and what is that? And what is that outside of the matrix? Now that's where I'm really at now with it. There's within the matrix and the flower of life being a supreme decode geometry of the matrix, which I didn't used to think of it that way. But I do now. I'm thinking within the controlled matrix, whatever that is, including the firmament, all that stuff we're talking about, a bubble containing us. That most don't even realize. Of course, you don't study it where it's tricky getting true information about that. And then what goes beyond that?
And then
What type of geometry is beyond the control of the flower of life?
right.
The control symbol, what do you call it, flower of life or whatever flower of life, whatever. You look at it and stuff goes off in us that's been programmed in us.
Yeah.
Everybody that sees it, oh man, what's that? I got to have it. I mean, I was that way. Wow, I never saw that before. Now I see it all over the place because you know what to look for. Whether in
there's a lot of derivative symbols all over the place
that's right
from the ancient times all the way up into modern marketing that are derivatives of that geometry. Obviously, it's also a fundamental of how we look at math.
Stones inside the two-dimensional slice of the flower of life, and I have three-dimensional models of it and things I've had made too. But my more recent reconfiguration tract is maybe that is to know that's the control, but that's the control inside the matrix. From being controlled outside the matrix, it's not back to the Godhead outside of a control matrix.
Well, so to bring it to natural law, since it has to be within the natural order of divine law and in accord with it, there must be, by extrapolation, a way to renegotiate that contract, if you will.
Yeah. Well, today, look at natural law could also be a dream spell. The natural law within the matrix, thinking that's back to the Godhead. We haven't gone far enough back. We've only bouncing off the ceiling, maybe the ice field and the firmament up there, and not getting past that and thinking
or our own perceptions.
Yeah, and people have near-death experiences. They don't get out of the matrix. They've just gone to one that reflects their consciousness that's also another hologram, and they think they've gone to heaven, and they've just gone to a hologram that matches their consciousness and their beliefs and their religious indoctrinations and all of that type of thing. They haven't. Where have they gone past that? By going into the light the wrong direction, where they can try to convince you, oh, you're not done here. You got to go back. Who says? Who says I need to go back? So it's not complete. Who says I even need to complete it? Mm-hmm. Is it worth completing? Or maybe I'll change my mind. I don't want to go back there. I want to do something else. Uh-huh. And that's within consciousness. And it's not a lower consciousness because I'm avoiding the creator and not obeying something that somebody tells me I'm supposed to obey because their light flash when they show up in front of me wows me so much I forget who I am. Right?
Yeah.
I just got a thing that I wrote down that I thought was very nice. Here, let me see. Where is it now? It's around here. Yeah, and I got this off of something on Instagram I thought was very interesting. It's just 2 sentences. Because of all the interferences that are going on and can go on, all the stuff flying around on different levels, and not kind, not nice, and stuff to mess with us within the matrix, you might say.
The matrix is interference. Interference patterns.
It is. Well, that's it. And maybe that's a deeper level of the flower of life. It's a certain type of interference pattern that holds certain level of this matrix together. I'm really questioning it now differently than I put it up on a pedestal.
Yeah.
Which I did for a long time because I wasn't at this apparent level. Anyway, it says, I only consent to beings that serve love to be able to access me. I do not consent to any entities to access my mind, body, or spirit unless they serve love. And I think that's just delightful.
Mm-hmm. I've said those exact words on a number of occasions.
Yeah, that type of thing.
I live those words all the time.
Yeah, me too. And so I, and I use certain protection things, geometries around me. Of course, those geometries may be within the matrix, but I'm dealing with one foot in one world and hopefully enough of my consciousness beyond that to keep my...
As it said, to be in the world.
But not of it.
Not of it. Yeah, correct.
Exactly that, And even in the as above, so below, most people only get the as above stuff and wander around in that. Even in the study of music, they talk overtones. How many people that talk overtones in music mention undertones?
Not many.
Yeah. See, that's their image.
I have thought about it in my own way, though I think about those things in a very abstract, more right brain sense, in a way, simply due to the fact that I have not yet dug into the theory of it and all of those things.
Mm-hmm.
And in application, that makes a lot of sense to my deeper knowing.
And I get into that when I'm teaching music. I don't just put the formulas and the ratios up there without the meaning of the as below, the mirror image.
Uh-huh.
See, a lot of people have, like Hulda Clark did, she would figure out the frequencies of different pathogens and then flip it over and use the inverse of that to destroy or cancel. There's different words that could be appropriate here.
Well, so it reminds me of a series of studies on cannabidiol, which is the synthetic variation of THC. Yeah. And what they found was, because it is a chiral mirror rather than a true variant of the original, because of that chiral relationship, it doesn't plug into reality in the same way, and it had completely different interactions in the body. Now, how much of that correlates or corresponds to this concept that you're talking about with mirroring in relationship to its effect that it has on us?
Well, I mean, there's both sides of an equation that are unified, because it's still a coin.
Because of what?
It's still a coin.
Yeah.
Flip it over, heads or tails, all right. But a lot of the music scales in the world have ratios in them that only come from knowing the undertones. They don't come from an overtone.
Right.
Other ones are only overtones. For instance.
So for everybody listening, can you differentiate what you mean by overtone and undertone? Aside from the
and I'll give you an example in music history too of this.
Cool.
So the overtones are basically take some fundamental note, and let's say frequency and you multiply it by whatever numbers from 1 on into infinity, as high as you want to go, and those are overtones through multiplying. Undertones divide. You take that note and divide it by the numbers 1 through as far as you want to go.
Right.
Okay, so you take a major third out of the overtone system, 5 over 4, 1.25. So if you have a C note, multiply by 1.25, 256C becomes 320E, and the ratio between them is 5 over 4. But its inverse, or in this case, real inverse, and its true opposite would be 1 over that, and then you octavize that and you get 8 over 5. So you get a multiple of 2 on top of the ratio, and a whole number below it, and that's an undertone ratio, where 5 over 4 has a whatever whole note, 7 over 5, 7 over 4, 11 over 8. Those are overtone ratios, and you flip them over. So you flip it over, and you get an A flat note. 409.
So is the flip it over, you were talking about in another interview, the polar relationships in color. Is there a similarity here?
There are things, and I'm looking at that aspect, not just of complementary colors and opposite colors and the mathematics of that, which is fascinating. The color story is harmonic as music. So I approach all my study of color with a musical mindset, which I believe is one of the ultimate languages of languages, is music and sound. Along with things show up in geometry, and sound and light work together to create things. And one of the ways that shows up are different geometries and shapes that have come into existence through the interaction of light, sound and color, sound and light wavelengths. And so those three are primary things that I do talk about and get into and look at. And I think that's really important. Now, in the ancient Chinese system, which was the ancient Babylonian system, parts of Greek, Pythagorean, parts of Pythagorean, not all of Pythagorean. India was a spiral of fifths, perfect fifths, 3/2, 1.5. And the Chinese had 60 notes. Start with 1, and you just keep going up 1.5, 1.5, till you have 60 notes to draw from. Now, not that they had a microtonal scale. They didn't use it that way. They just drew from it and made simple, mostly pentatonic 5-note scales out of certain choices out of that.
Uh-huh.
And by analyzing that, I found there were a series of gongs that they found. They were like 3,000 years old in China, buried in mud. And the gongs were fine, but a lot of the wood mountings were destroyed over time.
Yeah.
But some of the gongs were missing. So I analyzed all the gongs, and each gong gives off 2 different notes that are what are called an augmented second, not a minor third. Like a C note to an E flat would be a minor third, but it's not, it's a D sharp. So it has a different ratio. So every gong gave off 2 notes. So I analyzed all the gongs so I could eventually find what are the frequencies of the missing gongs. Because I believe there should be 64, like the 64 codons, the 64 components of the I Ching,
Yeah.
and all the cool
Which
stuff
also,
about.
the I Ching also corresponds to the flower of life. That we were
Absolutely.
talking about. Yeah, the vertices and inner, the crossover points and all of those are encoded.
All of those things. Now that's the stuff I think we should have been studying in school, so we grow up being in that and understanding that field and interacting.
That's why we weren't studying it in school.
That's right. That was like a super insulting thing to realize the ridiculousness of a lot of the stuff I learned in school.
Trained in school?
And trained, control. We're going to control and make you nice little worker bees that don't know enough to escape the matrix, but enough to celebrate and bow down to the matrix and obey us.
Yeah. So these gongs in China, you found.
I found the missing frequencies so I could complete the whole 60.
Did you find that there were 64 in your?
Yeah, you could see what was missing and how they put that together, but not the musical archaeologists didn't do that. They didn't carry it there. They just listed the frequencies of the gongs that they found. Now, these gongs are 3,000-year-old gongs, and they're perfectly tuned. And the Chinese then could cast the gong, and it comes out with the right frequency. They don't just make a form and give a couple of monks some files and send them to their room and say, you can't.
Yeah, I remember you
didn't
talking
do it
about
that
this
way.
on
I mean, but I'm just taking it a little farther here.
What struck me, because I have done bronze casting at a fairly high level, and shrink rates and all of those things come into play in modern bronze casting. What strikes like a gong for me and resonates is that through highly focused, unified prayer, sounding, and attention, it seems perfectly reasonable that the state of... So what's happening in liquid metal when it is cast is that it is flowing, and it's cooling, and you're controlling the rate and the flow of how it cools. And so by attending with a focused prayer and sounding, you can effect the crystallization process to such an extent that it crystallizes in such a way that it is in alignment with that perfection of your attention.
Yeah, you've impregnated it with a mantra, even if you just visualize it. You don't even say it. Talk about the sound. Right?
Yeah.
The sound that you don't speak out loud, but because you think it, that sound is still happening.
Oh, yeah.
Finding sound, not from something only that's heard. If you don't hear a tree fall in the forest, doesn't mean it didn't fall.
Yeah. So Bluey, the guy who played the piece on the piano, never played before, he said.
Oh, I love that. Wow. I really like that.
We were looking at the stars. He was waiting for something to happen that is not relevant to this, but we were looking at the moon. He's like, what do you suppose the fastest way to the moon is? And I'm like, the speed of thought. Yeah. And he's like, yeah, you get it.
That's right. Absolutely.
And so, yeah, we need not.
When you leave, you get there before you've left.
Yeah. Yeah. Funny how that works, isn't it?
Yeah, because you're thinking before you even say it or say it silently. So it's already.
And a lot of scientific method is proving out that things happen before they happen. Like they're getting to this point where processing speeds are fast enough that they can photograph light at such a degree that they're watching the shadows move. You know, they're
Right.
catching it between the space where the shadow has reached the wall behind the image that they're taking, or an object. What's that?
I love that. And also going back to the gongs for a minute and the casting and burying them in the ground during certain celestial configurations to structure those metals and cure it. And also the type of hammer blows, like same with sword making. Having thoughts for every single blow on the sword till you get to the point of one more blow and it fractures.
Yes.
But up to that point, it's as strong as it can become. But you have to know where that point is where it doesn't become fragile, it actually becomes stronger.
There's an overlay between the two, or a correspondence there that also is in many ways a crystallization process. And so our attention and its attenuation or aptitude for honing our attention allows us to crystallize in more clarity within this environment that we find ourselves in, right?
Have you seen some of the swords that they found in the underground by giants? I mean, like 10-foot.
I've seen pictures of them. I've never seen them in person, but
I haven't seen them in person either.
Having held a real samurai sword, a familial lineage samurai sword, the energetics and potency of that object are on an order of magnitude that is indescribable in a way, as compared to the stamped steel manufactured thing.
Right.
There is,
and the true samurai faith for me, he could put the sword down and achieve everything he could do with the sword with his thoughts.
Yeah.
Or her. Yeah. There are some females who can do that sword work. Beautiful women. They could slice up reality in his flat before you even know what happened,
Well, when you were describing your trumpet work in having to have that perfection of clarity to know that your note is the right note when you play as a solo lead, I also think of my art in that same way, where it is a form of swordplay similar to how sume and calligraphy is looked at. Where I gravitate towards those types of mediums that require me to be in that space to perform. Right. And so, I don't know quite where I was going with that, though.
Well, a friend of mine, studied with a Japanese master, and he makes some enzos. Okay. So the master taught him, you don't pick up the brush, you don't move the brush till you're in a certain space. Then you pick that brush up, put it to the canvas, and one motion, and that's it.
Yeah.
As soon as you lift it off the canvas, that's it. You don't go back, you don't add stuff, you don't erase any of that. That meditation of getting that together and looking at that canvas and feeling all that and honoring the brush and how all your equipment you pray over, and you have this amazing attitude toward, and that's what musicians also need to do with their instruments, is really make them sacred by their own prayer work with their own instruments. It's part of warming up on the cosmic level.
And how powerful is that when one puts that out to those in need? How much more does that resonate, the furtherance of right living in people when that strikes a chord? It brings a chord.
Yes.
Play on words.
That's the whole deal with words, and that they can be played on, and how then both in their spelling and their pronunciation.
I love
what they look like visually.
Yeah.
If I write numbers, I did this with numbers. Because I did most of my work by hand and not in computer spreadsheets. Gazillions of sound frequencies to the written out to all their decimals as far as I could take it, within certain reason.
Yeah.
And there it is by tracing it, especially with a pencil and wood, and it's vibrating, and the lead in the pencil, and you draw the number. There's something in the drawing and writing of that number, a harmonic of application.
Mm-hmm. Well, there are also some like more modern lens, scientific method lens, the Cartesian lens, that suggests that physically writing something activates completely different parts of your neurology and your neural network,
right?
And typing something.
Absolutely, that's what I'm right there. Didn't say it fully that way, but that's exactly. And I recommend. Well, I used to hand out hundreds of pages of notes and things. Now, a lot of times I say, you want the information, replay this, write it down. The act of writing it and transcribing it puts it into your nervous system. So I was doing some sound tuning on, at least one person in my life that I did this with, and their eyes were closed. And they asked me, well, what tuning fork is that? And I said, well, open your eyes. And I didn't even have a tuning fork on my hand because I put those frequencies into me, looking at them, writing them, listening to them, living in the living matrix of all of that, to where I was conveying the sound without even having a tuning fork or a sound instrument other than it's in my nervous system.
Well, you did have the tuning fork. The tuning fork was you.
That's what.
And I think about. That is
the God self.
The where we're at right now is people are using technology as a crutch to get to be able to walk again, and it's the decision to put down that crutch at some point that is the choice point for many people right now. With this conversation with AI and machine learning and self-driving cars and all of this other stuff, at some point you have to decide to put the prosthetic away and actually step into being whole. And the transverse of that is not putting down the prosthetic and confining yourself to replaying this reality over and over again.
And not creating a bunch of attention because you put all the crutches down and levitated and somebody saw you. Right?
That happens.
Yes, it does happen. I've done that.
I've had that happen. I've had that happen.
Yeah. How did I get here? Well, I'm here now.
Yeah.
Right. If I can't necessarily explain it all, it's part of that bigger picture. And only then putting the crutches away, like the speed of thought idea, and not having the crutches. Because, to me, like if somebody gives me a mathematical equation, on one level, the answer is known, especially to the person that gave me the equation. They already know the answer. They want to see if I get it right. So if one of my teachers did that, didn't read any of the books, got all the answers right on the tests, went into the field where the answer is and drew the knowledge right out of the field.
Yeah.
I like that.
Yeah.
That's where, we're headed. And it's that whole God self part of us knows that, already knows the answer. Now it's fun to work it out. And it's fun to go through the formulas and to know the different
That
formulas.
was what I was going to say, is that
somebody doesn't pass the test in math because they couldn't demonstrate how they did the square root of something. They just gave you the answer.
Yeah.
Well, that's not enough. Show me how you did it. What do you mean how I did it? I picked the answer right out of the field where it's known. Well, that's not good enough. Having the answer then isn't good enough. You got to show me the process to prove something. What? To prove that I'm farther away from my God self? Is that what I'm proving here?
Well, I mean, in that is this relationship that I have fostered in myself, and that is, since all is known, and I know that God, divine nature, wants me to have what I desire, then to get at the clarity of my desire, I have chosen to ask better, more articulate questions of what I want.
Yeah.
And so the question is not what is the right answer on some level. The question is, what's the right question about the experience of deriving the answer?
Mm-hmm.
And
asking the right questions, which we're watching play out in the political world, not asking the right questions, and even maybe knowing the answers, not giving the answers, and dancing around all of that stuff.
Right.
What does that progress us? No, I don't think so. That's a retrograde scenario there.
Well, in retrograde is a certain tension, and tension, like the string on an instrument, if wound too tight, breaks, and you don't get a nice resonant sound out of it. If it's too loose, you also get something floppy.
A lot of fret noise on a guitar when it's too loose.
Yeah, you don't get a proper sound out of it. So there is something to the right amount of tension, of tension, to build a tension, to discern what is worthwhile to focus on.
Yeah, and that's big characteristic in music, the whole aspect of tension and release, delayed release.
Yeah.
All of that type of thing to keep things interesting and intriguing along the way, and knowing how to manipulate that field, which is what many composers are very skilled at doing that brilliantly. So I just did it without studying how to do that, and then found out just by being in that space that my compositions have that. I don't have to analyze them. If I do, certain consciousness was there. I didn't do it from having a formula like, Pierre Boulez, the French composer of 20th century music. Everything is figured out with these special algorithms, and he plugs in the space. How long the measures are, how many notes per measure, everything you can think of. And it's that soulful, high level of mentalism.
Yeah.
That doesn't, to me, have the heart level to hold my true interest, other than a certain study of how can you apply that mental knowledge. But if you divorce it from the heart leading the way, I'm not interested. So I was saying, like, about bebop.
Yeah. So have you attended, like, or dug into the generative AI music, where it writes the lyrics and makes the song, and people are all excited about that? How do you feel about that space?
People who use those formulas, like the Tavistock people writing the music, pop rock and pop music from those formulas, and doing some brilliant stuff, by the way. So, wow, this is interesting. Very interesting. Beatles didn't write that. Hardly any of it, actually. Yeah. I find that really.
I think many of us have dug into that.
That's very, very interesting world of creativity, and what's behind it, and what is the design of the music to control certain thought fields, to a certain level of mind control in music that we can find beautiful, and not even realize that we've been seduced through that beauty into being mind controlled.
So that's
their mastery, is to do that, and they did do it.
And so, to step out of the manipulative aspect of that, we use those tools to express our highest focus of our love, and it does that without needing to.
That's where those different dimensions and higher dimensions of love, going beyond unconditional love into unselfish love, which is beyond unconditional love, and various things, to where in that love field, that right knowledge is there in a perfected way of putting it together that goes beyond AI. And that's my hope in the future, that the AI will help people wake up and use their natural, and use the love quotients in their formulas. I like that.
So how does one use that to achieve not needing it?
I think living in that field where that intention, you are one with that intention, with the Creator's intention, all as one thing. You haven't necessarily, although it's popular to do, you say, well, this is what God told me to do. Okay, maybe. I mean, I had a dream of a gospel version of the Lord's Prayer way back in the 80s. And I wrote it down. It came out of the dream, wrote it down, and I can perform it, and I've got several arrangements. One is a nice version of like black gospel combined with classical music and beautiful melody and chords and harmonies and all that. And another version, I put it into a Motown arrangement. It sounds like something Quincy Jones would do.
Yeah.
You know, he would be the one to do that arrangement. It's fun. I got that in a dream. Where did that come from in that dream?
Mm-hmm.
You know, and I've had other dreams.
It's a question I've asked myself a lot.
Yeah, who's dreaming? Is God dreaming through me? Am I dreaming? Am I blaming it on God? It's really just maybe a less discovered part of my own self that has that, or a former self as a composer who worked it out, and I'm just tapping into a parallel reality. I mean, I don't have to change the song. So it doesn't have imperfections in it because of that transcription, you might say. Composing, transcribing out of the dream world, I find really fascinating.
Oh, so do I. That's where I do a lot of my work. And
by the way, when I heard, you know, what you posted there with the chimes, you know, my tuning fork company made chimes for years. Right now, they need some additional trained personnel. So I've, for a few years, put a pause on my wind chimes, but I had all kinds of chimes tuned to my discoveries for various things.
What did I put about chimes?
Well, you have some chimes going on in the music in that one example.
Oh, right.
Yeah. A field with the chimes tuned, and you can use other instruments depending if they sync up with the chimes, sometimes even if they don't sync up with the chimes simultaneously. And I love doing that type of thing. And I did a thing like that, which I didn't release to the public, with the solfeggio frequencies, where I had 18 wind chimes made, one for each of the 18, the original Joseph Palaio 6 notes he discovered, and 12 more that I discovered. And a partner researcher, a friend of mine, got it simultaneously. Judy Cole got all 18 tones. And so I made them all as wind chimes in their exact octaves. Then I had Joel Andrews, before he passed away, playing on harp, tuned to that. And I actually made music rather than a drone with the solfeggio, expanded solfeggio field, combining the chimes and tuning forks with the harp, all mathematically perfectly in tune.
I love it.
Yeah. And I could see more and more things with that, because the original 6 do not
me too.
The original 6 solfeggios do not make a coherent, complete musical scale. Nobody would sing in that.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of disinformation about that stuff, you know, musically, and misunderstandings of those numbers and how they work, because they were just numbers in the Bible. They weren't as sound then. So I started making them as chimes and as tuning forks.
All right. So this is a hot topic around town. What's your take on the debate between 432 hertz and 440, and the cabal changing it to manipulate our resonance?
Well, there's that whole story, you know, of the Nazis pushing for the 440 to want to have an additional control and put more tension into the field, which 440 does.
Okay. Naturally.
Okay. Now, I played probably 90% or more of the music I've played throughout my entire career was tuned to 440. I had no idea, you know. But then 1980, I started tuning my piano at home to different frequencies. I used Venus 442.459 because I wanted that other love field in there. And I've used 432 and some other things, 444. They're all very interesting, but there's an interesting polarization out there due to manipulating the field around the 440. Now, it's not a bad note on its own as a frequency. The 440 hertz is the 440 sacred, certain royal cubits in the base of the Great Pyramid. If you have the right frequency length of the cubit times 440, you get that. Yeah. That stuff like that. So if 440 occurs.
And then there's the even temperament, like coming to a chord, you know, with an orchestra to find kind of a metrologist perspective on.
Right. And look at how many. Well, but all around the world, though, those frequencies are different. In Europe, you could go to different churches, and those organs were tuned to different frequencies in each church because it's part of the architecture. Yeah. And that's very complex.
any musician worth their salt will listen to the space and tune their instrument to it, so you get the right harmonic resonance within that space.
That's
Same
part
with,
of the alap in Indian music. In the beginning, you come in there, it sounds like they're
yeah,
pounding on the tablas and playing and then all of that stuff, and they're tuning the room and the space and themselves before, but typically before, but that is the beginning of the composition. It's tuning the space and tuning the people. It's called the alap, A-L-A-P, for those who maybe haven't studied Indian music. And Indian sitar player friend of mine, I asked him what, because he studied with Ali Akbar Khan.
Yeah.
Well, what did he tune to? Well, he tuned to 268.8 hertz, which is technically a D flat, the technical name, but he used it for his C sharp, because the sitar, 88 centimeters, is naturally tuned to C sharps. So that makes a lot of sense because of the natural resonance of the instrument and its length. And he asked him, well, why do you tune to that? He says, because that's what I hear. Now, I study the work of let's see, what's his first name? On matter and antimatter. I'm trying to remember what Edward Ostrander. And he isolated 4303 hertz as a creational frequency that comes out of the Milky Way for the purpose of creating material realization.
Formative causation.
Yeah, way cool. You take that down by octaves, you get 268.9375 compared to 268.8. So you're wondering, was Ali Akbar Khan coming to point, 1975 close to the actual Milky Way? And I mean, consider that with his consciousness, music of the spheres he's tuning into. That's, where did he get that note? He's hearing it, he's tuning to it, and that's, I have tuning forks made to that so I can, work with that when I want to work with that. I love that type of that. Talk about music of the spheres.
Speaking of which, what since we're there, what would you?
We were there earlier. We're just not talking about it the same as now.
We're talking around it.
Yeah, that's right. Is it around?
Which is great. What's the space in between what we're saying, everybody? So, music of the spheres. What is it in your?
Well, I find it really interesting in studying that and teaching sound healing and music history, all that kind of stuff. Of hearing Pythagoras and other people talk about, the planets and music and rotations and all of that. And so a lot of people associate it with the astronomy of the planet movements. That's very limited. So for my definition of music of the spheres is the music of the natural law of creation. That's probably the simplest way I could describe it. Right. Yeah. The harmonics of reality, when you analyze it, at all these ratios, you find everywhere you look under the microscope or the telescope, you're finding all these ratios of things that the Creator has used in observable existing reality. Mm-hmm. Beyond that, that's another part of the story, but at least something you can observe, you can measure it, for instance. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, we get into now the lies that have been told by NASA and others about what the real rotations of the planets are, how far away they really are, the sun and the moon. You get that from Crow's work, things that are inside the ice field and they're not that far away. And it's not 2,160 miles. It's only 32-mile diameter of the moon. And it's inside the dome, the ice field, not outside of that. It's not very far away. The moon and the sun, same diameter when we look at it, not, 93 million miles away at all, and not 864,000 mile diameter of the sun. So I have all this scientific stuff through history, and I've studied it, and I thought, well, maybe that's the best scientific measurements, but it was within reason, I thought. Mm-hmm. Now it can be very unreasonable to be lies that have been told for a long, long time by whoever decided we need to think about it being 93 million miles away, and it's not a Stargate. And now there's two suns up there, and they're different colors and there's different intensities of the heat. And some people see them both, and some think that one of them is a black hole behind the sun. This stuff is deep.
Yeah.
So how deep is that music of the spheres? Well, it's beings who can manipulate and create a second sun, even if it's a solar simulator with patents by the CIA that can be looked up. a solar simulator, and being put into practice that can be observed by people. What's the second sun? Where is that? Where did that come from? Very neat. So what are the lies? And we're seeing things now that are disproving the lies of how far away the sun and moon are, even how hot or cold the temperatures are there. There's even grass on the moon, according to some who have been there reporting it. Mm-hmm. What are the truths to base on to even analyze that? We can see something. What do we know about what we're seeing? And I've had to recalibrate a lot of that.
Yeah. Yeah. And part of our aptitude at living life is to remain flexible, both physically and mentally, to take on new information.
Yeah.
New innovation, even.
That's right. All of that.
Yeah.
All the different wordiologies that we could do with that, and being flexible. And some of the reality may be flexible, and the fact that it may be shape-shifting. It's not a set diameter, it's moving. Mm-hmm. And within that movement, what is the plus and minus of that movement typically, which is interesting too.
Yeah, that's kind of like, I don't know if you're familiar with Rupert Sheldrake or not. But he was digging into metrology, and he had, in one of his more watched talks, he talks about that he was looking at metrology and how the speed of light in its measurement in the modern measurement practices changes. It changes pretty drastically day to day and year to year and all of those things. And
I'm very interested in that.
Yeah, and but metrology decided for convenience sake, so it would fit the model, to fix the number in a sense. Kind of like you fix the horse race, to standardize it.
Yep.
And so what does that mean about our sense of what happens in dynamic flow and the equilibration of things as they breathe in and breathe out, and the waters recede and progress, and all of these rhythms that happen that we, if you're into Hermeticism, or at least have studied it at all, the rhythm is one of the Hermetic principles.
Those 7 principles is mandatory study. And then what you do with it, something else, but mandatory study of the 7 Hermetic principles. With that speed of light, I've in 1972, a bunch of scientists using a chain of lasers measured at 299,792.458 meters per second. And I thought, well, maybe that's all their equipment could do. So I didn't take it 100% serious.
Sure.
And then you find out that same number as 29.9792458 degrees north latitude is where the Giza period and the King's Chamber is.
Yeah.
Exactly. The whole number, all the way out to the 458.
Yeah, not to mention all the other correspondences.
Now, who built that? Why did they put that number in the field that wasn't? Before that, they just used 300,000 meters per second. Mm-hmm. And a lot of scientists, that's the number they used in their formulas, because I studied their formulas and back engineered them, and that's what they were using. Not the 299, even though in the pyramid, how old that is, and there's the 299, etc. figure.
Yeah, it reminds me of Demarte or those kinds of concepts. Like, if your aim is off, it might not mean much right here, but when you get out into orders of magnitude of perception, it really has a lot of qualitative differential, like steering a ship. If your calculation of north is 1 degree off, in the first 10 minutes, it doesn't mean much.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. What did that mean for the shooter there at the Trump rally? That person was so sharp, he only aimed to wound, and you could blame it on Trump moving his head slightly bit and all the story around that. Yet he only was how sharp was that sharpshooter, and what was the intent behind that is very interesting in terms of the target. And like the definition of sin is basically missing the mark.
Yeah.
So did he miss the mark, or was his mark just out enough to draw a little blood in the ear?
Or was he a sinner?
Right. Yeah, I know you. All that stuff comes into play, and the multi dimensions and the effect that missing had, different effect than had he taken Trump out with that shot, or the number of shooters that might have been involved. Actually, whatever that story is, it's just same with the Kennedy deal.
If shooter there be.
Yeah. Right. Yeah. A little capsule of blood, and you fall down, you squeeze it, and,
We see it in every theater of war.
And that's exactly. And all the
political
footage
theater
and AI footage of wars that aren't even going, battles that aren't even going on,
or just reuse of old footage, repurposed for new events.
Exactly.
Yeah, I mean that's all verifiable, and on some level, fascinating but uninteresting.
Mm-hmm. It shouldn't take too much of our consciousness, but to be open. To the reality that's presented, not necessarily being fixed. It's not fixed in stone, and the stone shapeshift. Yeah. Stones and tones. Put the right sound in there.
Comes back to that crystallization, and crystallization of the pineal gland, crystallization of your thoughts, crystallization of physical matter in actuality, and having a clarity to crystallize pure refraction of the light of this realm seems to be in order.
Mm-hmm.
Right. So.
And I'm really looking deep into also what sounds help open up the pineal gland. And interestingly enough, one that's being used as one of the tones I discovered in extending the solfeggios was the highest of those 18 tones, 963 hertz. And a lot of people are using that to stimulate their pineal gland.
Interesting that it would be those three numbers, isn't it?
Yeah, because they all reduce to 3, 6, and 9.
Yeah.
All 18 numbers.
Well, that doesn't surprise me whatsoever, knowing what I do about some other mathematicians, scientists, and inventors, and their use of the crossover point of those numbers in stillness and how that relates.
And it's found in vortex math too.
That's exactly what I'm pointing
Randy
at.
Powell and others who are
Randy Powell, Marco Rodin, Tesla.
Yeah, exactly. Randy does a good job explaining things so easier to understand than Marco's.
Yeah, Marco. I think so. In my sharing that with other people, number of different thinkers in that space, where many people get lost with Marco is his reliance on the spiritual aspect of number to explain it to people who are in the Western paradigm of not having a relationship with that space. And so a lot of people get lost in that, the disruption in themselves of getting too attached to that concept and missing the point of what he's describing and trying to illustrate and teach.
Mm-hmm.
So, and so what was the name of the other gentleman that you were talking about?
Marco Rodin and Randy Powell.
Randy Powell, that's right.
He's made some very good videos, and it turns out that all of those 18 notes that I put together out of the expanded solfeggio are all vortex math notes.
Yes.
The program around circles divided into 9. Mm-hmm. Very interesting stuff.
But it really is.
Not the story that the Gregorian chants were sung with those rows, is because it's not a scale that they sang in. It does not produce that.
Wait, unpack what you mean by that.
Well, they call them the solfeggios because
gotcha.
Guido d'Arezzo, this monk back in that Renaissance time, put together the solmizations, syllables for singing, like the do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, do. Then it was now some ti, do, but si, do was the original, and ut. was the Latin for do, ut, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si, like that for the scale, so that they could teach the music and people could sing it with the different syllables in different keys, and it built from there. But the ratio between any of the notes in that do, re, mi, fa, sol, la, si are not ratios in the scales that Gregorian chants are ever sung in at all.
Right.
So it's very, calling them solfeggios on that level is a stretch beyond. They were just numbers from the gematria translating from the Bible, certain parts in the Bible. Right. It was a repeating number code that only had 6 tones to it out of the 18. Which,
as you said before, does not complete a solfeggio.
No, and the intervals between them, you without absolute perfect pitch couldn't even sing. And if you do try to put the solfeggio melodies into that, you don't have the right tunings between them. You don't have the right ratios. So it stretched that whole Gregorian thing. However, Joseph Puleo called up one of the U.S. colleges that has a Gregorian music department. I won't say what college or the name of people. And he got the head of the department on the phone. And he says, because the first line of that out of the Bible is ut queant laxus, and he asked him, well, what does ut queant laxus mean? And the head of the music department says, none of your damn business, and slammed the phone. No, come on.
Which means that he dug into it further.
He could have faked that. Oh, that just is Latin. That's all this means. Yeah. He could have made a non-event. But with that reaction, gave it away. In my opinion.
For people like us, typically that means, I guess that's somewhere to dig into.
That's right. Thank you very much for losing it, Eric. And you're losing that you gave something.
Yeah. So that begs the question, what does it mean?
What does what mean?
The Latin phrase that you just sprung on.
Well, I got to look at it as much as I've taught that over and over right this moment. I have all of those translated into English.
What is the importance of looking at that Latin phrase then in context?
Well, there's a lot of stuff in Latin that's very magical. Music of the spheres built into Latin. Even though there's the abuse of Latin as not being a typical spoken language that people understand. You see, they do it in the church, so they can do ceremonies. People don't even know what they're saying unless they're intellectually steeped in understanding Latin. Very like Sanskrit and things like that. There's those languages have a placeholder of those vibrations in a certain way, and I respect that. Same within Greek. You sing it in different languages. It may mean sort of the same, but the sound of the languages has different harmonic content of the syllables.
Carrier capacity.
Yeah. So it's very interesting. And the fact that that's dug out of Bibles that have, hundreds of translations and mistranslations and edits and all the nonsense in creating that and who actually wrote them. The Council of Nicaea 325 AD and all the altering of a book to control people and claim that God created these things.
And embed a codex within it as well.
And within that, some mathematical codexes that are astounding.
Oh, yeah.
But have you tried to think that?
Genius.
Well, yes. So they can put nonsense and have codes going on in it between the words and with the words and going back and forth between number and letter and word and adding the numbers up and what they resolve to and the number like 963 before resolving it to a 9, is a certain placement of those 3 numbers out of Tesla in reverse order. 369, but you should know about 963 as well, you see.
Yeah.
They're very, very interesting because all of that stuff is there on the phone. The first column, vertical phone, goes 14147, then middle one 258, then 369. So you do the anagrams, and each column has 6 different combinations. That's 3 times 6. You got 18 notes. And that's how I figured that out of the original 6, noting that in the original 6, there were 2 from each column in the ones that Joseph Puleo studied. And then, his work got put into a book by Leonard Horowitz called Healing Codes for the Biological Apocalypse.
I have seen this book referenced. I have not read it.
Yeah, it's interesting. There's a story behind that. I don't think I'm going to make it fully public. You know what that is. Yeah, I don't want to get some people on my case because I spilled the beans about some things.
Yeah,
and not Paleo. No, he's in the clear. He was a far out guy, and we did a bunch of stuff too. You know, I took a bunch of those codes and mapped them out on a diagram based on certain things from chapels like Chartres Cathedral in the Labyrinth, and I laid that labyrinth over the brain, and programmed each of the pathways with different notes from those 18 tones. As a way, and then you could listen to them in headphones, and the sounds could move, and it would take you around the labyrinth in your brain. It was very. That's the work I did before Paleo passed away.
Was that using Neurophone or something of that nature? Or?
You could. There's different. I knew Flanagan personally. There's a lot of
interesting guy.
Nicely put. Yeah, very interesting and worth listening to and studying, but not over believing.
Right. Well, I know that was brought into the military-industrial complex, and those technologies were co-opted and used for a great number of things that are.
It is a military-industrial. Look at the word
questionable. Yeah, it's complex.
Well,
it's complex.
Flanagan was part of a program because he was taken into their brain banks when he was 10. His science experiment was had a missile guidance system applications.
Yeah, I recall that experiment.
He lived not too far from me.
Had to do with pinpointing using the degradation of the half-life or something of that nature.
He had some interesting things there.
He did.
But there were certain problems with the Neurophone. I got one at one point because I wanted to see if I could do stuff and stimulate my brain so when I listened to music, I could hear a deeper level or memorize things. I wanted it to empower my brain and put music, but I couldn't stand listening to the tone of the music through the Neurophone whatsoever. It was unbelievably irritating.
Yeah. Well, you're bypassing all of the natural receptivity of how sound is meant to be absorbed.
Yeah,
in a way.
And working with the grains of sand in the ear, so to speak.
Yeah.
All of that.
What I did find interesting about it was, because I did have experience with it. And what I found interesting was being able to hold somebody else's hand in a circle and the connectivity of closing the circuit. And all of us being able to hear the same thing at the same time in that space was interesting.
Oh, yeah. And the Navy confiscated that and put thou shalt not talk about this for a long time.
Yeah.
And when they took that off, he could make the Neurophones again. But there was some further work that needed to be done with that to have a more beautiful listening experience.
The beauty is what was missing from it.
That's right. Well, exactly. And then you take that out of the equation and you're kind of back to synthetic realities again.
Mm-hmm. What is the importance of appreciation of beauty, like the study of aesthetics and those things?
To me, that's a deep part of the God mind itself in the music of the spheres, beauty and the quality of beauty and love. That, it's another way that love is expressed in art and other things, architecture, nature, through beauty is the God self smiling. The God in the flower smiling through the beauty of the flower. And the fact that in a field of mixed flowers, they all harmonize with each other no matter what their colors are. But when artists try to paint it, a lot of the colors don't talk well to each other. They don't harmonize. Even though the artist is trying to capture as close as they can with their pigments of those flowers in the field, it becomes like digital and not analog in a way.
Well,
even though,
pigment is refraction, and
that's right.
And flowers are, in a technical sense, optic.
Yeah, emanating.
Yeah,
that.
Yeah,
and that truth and the colors of them and the uses of the flowers in meditation and other things by their color. and what they're that's a huge world that I find really fascinating.
Likewise,
How the light shows up in different ways, and the light in nature, and the intelligence of the color, and what the actual wavelength of that color is.
mm-hmm.
That doesn't often get, and often does not get captured fully. As wonderful as the artist may be, and as beautiful as their art may be, there's a missing element of that consciousness that makes it almost digital.
Yeah. Well, that's one of the reasons why in my art, well, one thing I do is I do a lot of black and white,
Mm-hmm.
and allow the imagination to fill in the meaning while presenting the form of the beauty. And the other, when I do color work, I typically step out of trying to copy it and express the meaning and the feeling and the presence of that space rather than the thing itself.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? And I find that it creates the vibe of that beauty and the feeling of
it's not imitating
without trying to be that beauty. It's
which you can never do.
Yeah.
Which is exactly. Well, one of the things in terms of the color, in terms of black and white, my ex-partner who passed away, Wes Bateman, and he was a telepath and wrote a lot of books, and one on UFO drive systems called Dragons and Chariots, and another one called Through Alien Eyes, and another one, Knowledge from the Stars. He was a fascinating individual. And he said the ETs told him you could learn everything about color by understanding black, white, and gray.
Mm-hmm. What do you suppose that, I mean, for a layman, what do you suppose that could be taken to mean?
Well, there's different things. You can think of white radiating all colors and black absorbing all colors. So you got that aspect of the as above, so below, absorbing and radiating.
And then gray being the gradient.
The male function radiating and the female function holding that womb space and absorbing in a certain way, even though they have a radiant field. But also what the female aspect of the black light and dark light, and that goes deep into Egyptian mysteries that studied the goddess energy being the black light spiral and what that is. And I've looked into that, but I didn't understand gray that well. I understand, mixing black and white and creating different shades of gray, There's more than 50, by the way, although some people they got hung up on that, got a little addicted to those 50 shades,
Yeah, well, no doubt.
Yeah. And I'm not judging. I'm just, it's interesting, Yeah.
So gray being a quality of its own.
Now I'm studying some stuff from the color sound fellow from Germany, and Peter Mandel. And he's got, which I've just recently received through him, through a friend of mine who studied with him, his different philosophies of stuff about gray, because he started using color puncture wands that have a little crystal or glass wand on the end of like a mag light, and putting different colors. They were the average in each field, actually. It wasn't so much the mathematics of the color yellow as it being the middle of the yellow field.
Yeah,
okay.
like a mean average.
Exactly. That's what he was using. And there's a good intelligence for choosing that middle spectrum. Square root of 2 out of the octave being the middle of the octave, that kind of thing. And then he's got some very esoteric writings about the color gray, which I'm not prepared to talk about because I haven't fully absorbed and integrated thoughts about gray that I had never had before about gray. Because I've never used, I have the wands from him, and I have the gray, but I didn't know the applications about gray light as a healing light, and what gray value of the gray zone beyond the polarity of black and white. Very, very interesting stuff. I can talk later at some point, but I need to really integrate it. Okay.
I'd love to dig into that one. Color.
Who else talks about that? Who people in color history, all the famous people.
Well, I would say who else talks about that publicly?
Right.
Yeah. I do have some friends that are interested in some very interesting things, and very few of them are always in a place for themselves where they want to do this sort of thing.
Right.
And that's okay.
Yeah, I have that.
And thank you for doing that. I think that where do people find your work, and how do they connect with you if they choose to? Or do you want to?
Oh yeah, sure. Well, I have a website, and they can write to me there. My business email of universalsong.net. Randy Masters at universalsong.net, and that universalsong.net is the current website, which is being built by help, but not as much my efforts, because I have people helping me with that type of thing, and I don't have everything, and I'm not posting just all these documents and blurbs and or you know what I mean, vlogs and blogs. And I don't spend my time doing that in terms of social media, but they can reach me that way, and they can call my cell phone at 831-295-0650, 831-295-0650. And I may or may not be there, but I can get your message. That's fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. KWTF radio on the West Coast, and of course WOKE radio on the East Coast. That's one way. Yeah. And so I do my best to get back after my over 2,000 emails in a day and messages. And if people do message me, it's nice to get their name, because I don't recognize their nick numbers. Yeah, no doubt. That is so irritating, getting a number. Now, whose phone number is this? How should I respond? Who is, all of that kind of thing. Well,
I've taken to responding, I don't have your number in my phone. Who is this, and what do you need?
Yeah, exactly. Right.
I haven't got time to wishy-washy consider whether it's polite or not.
Are you doing a number on me, or what is this?
Yeah.
It does get in, but thank you, for asking, and I have if they go online, people have posted interviews with me all over the place.
Yes.
That I didn't
I've watched a number of them. They're all fascinating.
Well, thank you.
Because of your breadth of knowledge, we could rattle on between both of our interests and their overlay, rattle on for, I'm sure, days on end. And,
DAYS and DAZE on end too.
Well, it depends on who's listening, I suppose.
It does, doesn't it? And where I'm at when I am talking,
right?
All of that stuff. But I find it's really important, and the communications and reaching out in good ways without getting addicted to the social media aspect, which I find abusive.
Yeah, it certainly has a tendency to be abusive and instant gratification that leads us away from an internal dialogue of discerning really what's really going on here.
Well, there's an addiction to information, whether people even maturely apply it or not. They're addicted to more and more and more.
Well, there's, in a sense, and I mean, we could probably go on a whole other tangent on this, and maybe we will on another.
Well, in geometry tangents, but we can also go into different signs.
I meant an intellectual tangent.
Yeah, and sines and cosines, the whole deal.
Yeah. Oh, there's so much there.
But I love it. Because this is living in the music of the spheres the way we're talking. We're not off point. Something's tangent, we bring it in, because it's another aspect of that holographic field. And all of a sudden you get a perspective that has you turn your head. Mm-hmm. And the bullet misses you, and you see something very interesting.
Right. Yeah. And you lead into it and go, "What's in there? What? Yeah, I want to know."
And I love going down these rabbit holes, and they're fun. Some of those rabbit holes are very, very fun.
Yes.
Especially when you go down one and you think that's the hole you're going down. You look around and something else catches you, and you only went down the one primary one, so you could go off to the left or the right, before you, above you, below you, all those different, like 7 points or so of that hologram,
Yeah. And then there's the faces and the reflection on the faces that you can go down to. You have the radiative and you have the compressive.
Yeah. Absolutely. Was there another big question you had today that we touched on, or you feel we needed to say a little more about to feel more complete on?
Right now, I think that was fantastic. My bladder is full. My wife is
all right, but it doesn't piss you off. It's full, but it doesn't piss you off.
No, I'm an old hand at
good working
present in my body.
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, embodied even. And I sure do appreciate you coming and chatting with me and with our audience. I really enjoyed the romp through our ideas and
I'm curious how your audience will respond to us.
I'll keep you in the loop on that.
Yeah, there may be some how this goes out. We're not in control of.
Well, that's great.
Isn't it? We reach places we weren't even targeting, or so.
Well, we have history and we have mystery, and I like both of them. Yeah.
How about a little bit of her story with that Sophia stuff too?
Well, that is the mystery, I think.
Isn't it? I know they like that veil,
story.
Veil,
Yeah. So, I put out my creative generative spirit into the world in as much grace as I have capacitance for, and where that goes is its own at that point.
When you carve on trees and wood, is that wood talking to you too, the personality in the wood?
Yeah,
giving you stories and telling you things you didn't even ask, and it sensed what you needed to know and it starts telling you things.
Yeah, for sure.
Isn't it?
It's fascinating, and it's enlivening to engage reality with the quietude to be able to hear the communications that are all around us in every relationship that we have.
You've probably erected one of the largest woodies in your neighborhood.
I'm a Randy too.
Okay.
All right. Lots of love.
Okay.
And
you too. Absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks for that.
Us connecting.
I'd love to do it again.
Yeah, me too. Oh yeah. Big fun. Remember, PHUN, educated fun. We love that.
Educated fun is the way.
In the now, the NAO.
Totally.